Hello friends, it's Mandy with Be the Spark Cosplay. I make a lot of ball gowns and historical cosplay, and one of the questions I frequently get is how do you get your fabric patterns to match up so perfectly? So today I just wanted to show you how I did that with a quick tutorial on how you can achieve perfect pattern matching. I think where a lot of people get hung up with pattern matching is that they're trying to match the pattern up along the edge of their pattern pieces. But what happens is when you are overlapping these, you're going to lose your pattern. Instead, we want to align our pattern along the edge of that actual middle seam that we're going to sew. Don't worry, I'm going to show you a quick trick to get it right every time. If you're using a tissue paper pattern, you can just put that right on top of the fabric. If you're using a pattern that you have printed out onto printer paper, I would definitely consider tracing it onto tracing paper. I think the tracing paper just makes it really easy to be able to see the pattern underneath and get a better idea of where you want everything to line up. So here, you want to start with the center piece whenever possible and kind of move outward. So I can actually put the center piece anywhere that I want. I'm going to make sure that it's lined up, that it is centered along the pattern. And then I want to make sure that I hold it down with something. You can pin it, you can use pattern weights. I love these river rocks. These are kind of like my secret hack because they're so easy to use and they're relatively inexpensive. Now when you're cutting, you do want to cut as precisely as possible around your pattern because this is going to be really, really important when you're sewing this together. Now remember how we had that seam allowance along the edge? We want to figure out where our actual seam is going to be. And so the easiest thing to do to figure that out is simply to tuck under that seam allowance and just pin it right along your seam line. This is 5/8 of an inch in for most commercial patterns, but you can find patterns that have a 4/8 of an inch seam allowance as well. Regardless, you're just going to pin it underneath right at that seam allowance. Then you're going to take your second pattern piece that will adjoin to this one, and you want to fold under the pattern just like you folded over the edge of your fabric itself. Now this does work best for straight lines. If you start getting into curved lines, of course your pattern is not going to line up perfectly, but you can do this to get as much of it the same as possible. With both of those edges folded under, we can now see exactly where that seam is going to connect. So it's time to go back to our fabric. Now for the next step, you want to make sure that the pattern piece you've already cut out, as well as the rest of your fabric, is the same side up, same direction as you just used. And you're just going to lay your cut pattern piece right on top of the fabric, and you want to line it up as perfectly onto the fabric as you can. Now if you have a woven, it may be a little hard to get it perfectly, but we want to do the best that we can. And voila, there we go. Now we're going to take our next pattern piece with that edge folded under, and we're just going to butt it right up against our cut piece exactly where we want it. And then we're going to make sure that this one stays in place with your pattern weights or pins. Once that's perfectly in place, you have it set down, and you want to very carefully unfold that edge back out, making sure that you do not accidentally move your fabric. And then once again, we want to make sure that we cut very precisely along those edges. Now that we have our two cut pieces, we want to unpin that first piece, and now it's time to sew them together. With right sides together, we are going to pin these in place, and I try to pin it as close to that seam line as possible just to help me visualize if these two pieces are going to go together properly. Looks like they will. So now we're going to sew it together. And there you have it, a lovely matched seam. Until next time, keep creating.